Before anyone spoke the word that would change her life, Gracie Holloway already knew something terrible was coming. Children notice things. They notice the silence between sentences. They notice the looks adults exchange when they think nobody's watching. They notice the way a smile arrives too late. And Gracie had been noticing for a very long time. The room was quiet, except for the faint ticking of a clock somewhere beyond the hallway. St. Mary's Hospital, 3rd floor, room 14. Late afternoon sunlight spilled through the window and stretched across the floor like liquid gold, but it never seemed to reach the bed. The bed was too large for Gracie. Everything felt too large now. The room, the hospital, the future, even the silence. She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling, the same ceiling she had stared at every day for weeks. The cracks had become familiar companions. One looked like a river. Another looked like a horse. The largest one, near the window, reminded her of a boy from school named Thomas, whose front teeth never quite met when he smiled. So she called that crack Thomas. It was easier to give things names. Things felt less lonely when they had names. Outside, somewhere beyond the hospital walls, life continued without asking permission. Cars rolled through the streets. Children chased one another through dusty Arizona neighborhoods. Dogs barked. People laughed. But inside room 14, time moved differently. It crawled. Some days felt longer than entire months. Some nights felt endless. And every morning she woke up hoping she would feel stronger. Every morning she discovered she did not. The treatments took things from her, little by little. First, her energy, then her appetite, then pieces of her hair, then the simple confidence that tomorrow would be better. The adults called it treatment. The nurses called it progress. To Gracie, it felt like a battle she never volunteered to fight. A battle that followed her everywhere, even into her dreams. She turned her head toward the window. A framed photograph rested on the sill. Her mother, her father, frozen forever beneath a bright summer sky. The picture had been taken before the accident, before flashing lights, before funeral flowers, before people started speaking in soft voices around her. Her father's arm rested across her mother's shoulders. They were smiling, not posing, really smiling. The kind of smile people wear when they believe they have years ahead of them. Gracie looked at the picture every day. Sometimes she imagined stepping inside it. Sometimes she imagined hearing their voices again. Sometimes she imagined asking questions she never got the chance to ask. What happens when people leave? Can they still hear you? Do they miss you too? Nobody seemed able to answer those questions, not even Grandma Margaret. Especially not Grandma Margaret. Margaret Holloway had become the strongest person Gracie knew, but strength and sadness often lived in the same place. Gracie could see both whenever she looked at her grandmother. The old woman arrived every morning carrying a smile she carefully built before entering the room, and every evening she left carrying fears she never allowed Gracie to see. Today was no different. Margaret sat beside the bed reading from a book. Her voice was calm, warm, steady, yet Gracie noticed how tightly she held the pages. She noticed the tired shadows beneath her eyes. She noticed everything. She always had. The truth was, Gracie had known something was wrong long before any doctor explained it. Long before hospitals, long before blood tests, long before leukemia became a word she could spell. The first sign had arrived months earlier, a tiny thing, almost invisible. At dinner one evening, she slouched in her chair. Usually, her mother corrected her immediately, sit up straight every single time. But that night, the correction never came.
Her mother simply watched her, smiling, almost sadly. At the time, Gracie didn't understand why she remembered that moment. Later, she would. Then came another memory, one she could never forget. Her father returning from an appointment, walking through the front door, crossing the kitchen, stopping at the sink, and standing there, not moving, not speaking, not turning on the water, just staring downward, as though he had seen something that frightened him, something he could not bring himself to say aloud. Gracie watched from the hallway, hidden, silent. Children often witness the beginnings of disasters before adults realize they are watching. She did not understand the details, but she understood fear. Fear has a shape, and she could see it standing in her father's shoulders. Weeks later, the answer arrived. Leukemia. She wasn't supposed to hear the word, but hospital walls are thinner than people think.
She sat alone in an examination room, studying a chart on the wall, while voices drifted through the partially closed door. A doctor's voice, then Margaret's, then silence. Then the word, leukemia. Everything afterward felt different. The world did not end. The sky did not fall. The room did not spin. But something changed. A line had been crossed. Childhood ended quietly that day. Not with a scream, not with tears. Just a single word floating through a doorway. Leukemia. From that moment forward, life divided itself into two parts. Before and after. Now, lying in room 14 months later, Gracie listened to the distant sounds of carts rolling through hallways. The hospital never truly slept. Neither did fear. But there was one thing she looked forward to every week. Friday night. Movie night. The nurses wheeled patients toward a small projector room. For a few precious hours, people stopped being patients. They became explorers, cowboys, heroes, dreamers. Anything except sick.
And among all those movies, one actor stood above the rest. John Wayne. She had watched his films again and again, not because he always won, not because he carried a gun, not because he rode horses. There was something else, something harder to explain. When he stood on a screen, the world felt steady, like nothing could break, like fear itself took a step backward. For a little while, she forgot about hospitals, forgot about treatments, forgot about tomorrow. A little while, that was all. But sometimes a little while was enough, more than enough. That afternoon, after Margaret left briefly to get coffee, Gracie reached toward the bedside table. There was a notebook there, a pencil, and a thought she had been carrying for days, maybe weeks. She pulled the notebook closer, opened to a blank page. For several seconds, she simply stared. Then she began to write. Slowly, carefully, each letter shaped with determination. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't asking for gifts. She wasn't asking for miracles. She only wanted someone to know what they had unknowingly given her. A little while without fear, a little while without pain, a little while where she could simply be a child again. And somewhere far beyond Tucson, beyond hospital walls and desert highways, beyond everything Gracie could see, a famous man was about to receive a letter he would never forget. A letter written by a little girl who believed it would disappear into the world unnoticed. She was wrong. Very wrong. The letter traveled farther than Gracie ever imagined. It crossed highways, passed through sorting rooms, moved from one stack of envelopes to another. Thousands of letters traveled every day. Most were forgotten almost immediately. Most were never remembered by the people who delivered them. Gracie's letter looked no different. A small envelope, a child's careful handwriting. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing that should have changed anything. And yet, sometimes the smallest things alter entire lives. The Arizona sun was brutal that afternoon. Heat shimmered above the desert floor. A film crew moved across a dusty location east of Tucson. Lights, cameras, crew members carrying equipment. The controlled chaos of movie-making. In the middle of it all stood John Wayne. Between scenes, he was working through a stack of fan mail that his assistant had collected during the week. The pile was enormous. Hundreds of letters, requests, autographs, invitations, stories. Most received only a quick glance. There simply wasn't enough time. His assistant stood nearby. "Another mountain this week," he said. Wayne nodded and continued sorting, envelope after envelope, until one caught his eye. Small, plain, childlike handwriting, no decoration, no attempt to stand out. For some reason his hand stopped. His assistant noticed. Probably another autograph request. Wayne turned the envelope over. Something about it felt different. He opened it. The desert noise seemed to fade. The crew continued working. People walked past. Someone laughed in the distance. But John Wayne no longer heard any of it. His eyes moved slowly across the page. Then slower. Then slower still. By the time he reached the final line, he wasn't reading anymore. He was seeing. Seeing a little hospital room. Seeing a child he had never met. Seeing a girl staring at a movie screen while trying to forget pain, even if only for a while. Especially that part. For a while, the words stayed with him. Because adults understood something children often didn't. A child who writes about forgetting pain for a while has already experienced far too much of it. He read the letter again, then a third time. The assistant watched quietly. In all the years they had worked together, he had never seen this happen. John Wayne normally moved quickly through correspondence. Not today. Today he seemed frozen. When he finally lowered the pages, the assistant asked carefully, "Everything okay?" Wayne folded the letter, placed it inside his shirt pocket, close to his heart, then looked toward the desert horizon. "No," he said quietly. "Not really." For several moments he stood there, thinking. The assistant waited. Then Wayne asked a question. "What hospital?" The assistant blinked. "What?" "The girl. What hospital?" He pointed at the letter. The assistant stepped closer, read the return address. "St. Mary's, Tucson." Wayne nodded. A decision had already formed. The kind of decision that happens instantly and never changes afterward. He looked toward the director, then toward his watch, then back at the assistant.
Clear my afternoon tomorrow. The assistant stared. You've got meetings. Not anymore. Studio won't like that. Wayne shrugged. They'll survive. The next day arrived, Thursday. The hallways of St. Mary's Hospital carried the familiar sounds of medicine and waiting. Rolling carts, quiet conversations, footsteps, distant announcements. Inside room 14, Gracie was once again staring at the ceiling. Thomas the Crack watched from above. Captain the Stuffed Rabbit sat beneath the window. The photograph of her parents caught sunlight near the glass. Everything looked exactly as it had yesterday, exactly as it had for weeks, which was why she didn't expect the knock. 3 soft taps. Margaret looked up. Come in. The door opened, and for a moment nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody spoke.
A large man stood in the doorway, canvas jacket, tan hat, broad shoulders that nearly filled the frame. Margaret recognized him immediately. Every American recognized him immediately. For 1 second, she thought she must be mistaken. For 1 second, reality seemed to wobble. Then she saw the letter in his hand and understood. Her eyes filled before she could stop them, not because a movie star stood in the room, because someone had come. Someone important, someone busy, someone who didn't have to be there, yet was. Wayne looked at Margaret, then at Gracie. His expression changed, very slightly, but enough. The letter had prepared him for many things. It had not prepared him for how small she would be. Children often seem larger in their writing. Their voices feel older, stronger. Gracie looked fragile enough to disappear beneath the blankets. For a moment, his heart broke. He hoped nobody could see it. Margaret swallowed. She talks about you every day. Wayne nodded once. I know. His voice sounded rougher than usual, as though emotion had sanded the edges. Then he stepped forward, slowly, not like a celebrity entering a room, like a guest entering someone's home. He approached the bed. Gracie stared, not blinking, not speaking, just staring. The way a child stares at something impossible. Finally, she said, You're real. Wayne laughed softly. Last time I checked. The answer surprised a smile out of her. A real smile, one Margaret hadn't seen in weeks. Wayne pulled a chair beside the bed. The chair immediately looked ridiculous beneath him, too small, too fragile. But he sat anyway, completely unconcerned, as if there were nowhere else on earth he would rather be. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he lifted the folded letter. I got your message. Gracie looked embarrassed. Her cheeks reddened slightly. I told you not to write back. Wayne nodded. You did. She crossed her arms weakly. So why are you here? His eyes sparkled. Because technically, I didn't write back. The realization reached her a second later. Then she laughed. A genuine laugh. Bright, unexpected, the kind that transforms a room. Wayne laughed too, and suddenly the tension disappeared. The ice shattered. Conversation began. Not forced conversation. Not the careful conversations adults usually have with sick children. Real conversation. The best kind. Gracie told him about movie nights, about Captain, about Thomas the ceiling crack, about books, about school, about horses, about everything. Wayne listened, actually listened. Most people hear children. Very few truly listen. He listened. Every word mattered, every story mattered, every detail mattered. Hours passed unnoticed. Outside the room, nurses slowed whenever they passed. Doctors found excuses to walk by. Nobody wanted to interrupt. Nobody wanted to break whatever was happening inside. At one point, Margaret quietly slipped out for coffee, leaving them alone. The room grew quieter.
Wayne's eyes drifted toward the photograph on the windowsill. The picture of her parents. He studied it, then pointed. "That's your father?" Gracie nodded. "His name was Robert." Wayne looked closer. The smile, the posture, the confidence. Something about the man felt familiar. "He looks like somebody who could fix anything." A shadow crossed her face, then a small smile. "He could." Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable silence, the kind built from understanding. Finally, she spoke again, very softly. "My mom used to say you reminded her of him." Wayne didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained on the photograph. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. "Your mother sounds smart." Gracie smiled. The sadness remained, but now something else existed beside it. Comfort. For the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. When afternoon turned toward evening, Wayne stood, reluctantly. He reached for a paper bag he had brought. "I brought something." Inside were books, new stories, new adventures, new worlds. Then colored pencils, bright colors, fresh colors, colors untouched by hospitals. Finally, he produced a small leather notebook, beautifully made, simple, elegant. The initials embossed on the cover, G.H. Gracie stared, speechless. She ran her fingers across the letters, as though proving they were real. Wayne smiled. "Thought you might have more stories to write." She looked up at him. Something shimmered in her eyes, not tears, something stronger. Hope. The thing cancer struggled hardest to destroy. And then Wayne revealed one final surprise. A metal film canister, round, silver, special. Gracie's eyes widened. "What is that?" Wayne grinned. "Next Friday's movie." She looked stunned. "You brought the movie?" "I know a guy." For the first time in many months, excitement completely overpowered fear. Next Friday suddenly mattered. Next Friday suddenly felt close, important, worth reaching, worth fighting for. As the evening sun painted the room gold, Wayne placed his hat back on his head. "I should get going." Gracie's smile faded slightly. The familiar fear of goodbye returned. He noticed immediately. Then he said something neither she nor Margaret would ever forget. "I'll be back Friday." The room fell silent. Gracie searched his face, making sure. Absolutely sure. "Promise?" John Wayne extended his hand. The little girl shook it. His enormous hand wrapped around hers. A promise sealed. And for the first time since entering room 14, the future contained something besides hospitals. Friday. Just Friday. But sometimes one thing to look forward to is enough to keep a person moving. And as John Wayne walked down the hospital corridor toward the elevators, dozens of eyes followed him. Not because a movie star was leaving,
because everyone had just witnessed something much rarer. A man keeping his humanity. And upstairs in room 14, a little girl stared at the leather notebook in her lap. For the first time in a very long time, she wasn't thinking about dying. She was thinking about Friday. Friday arrived like Christmas morning. Long before the nurses entered room 14, Gracie was already awake. The first light of dawn had barely touched the hospital windows when she opened her eyes and looked toward the clock, then toward the door, then back toward the clock again, waiting. For the first time in months, she wanted the day to move faster. The treatments still hurt. Her body was still weak. Nothing about the illness had changed overnight. Yet something inside her had. Hope had returned. Not a giant hope, not the kind people write books about. A smaller hope, a quieter one. But often those are the strongest, because they survive when everything else falls apart. The nurses noticed it immediately. The sparkle in her eyes, the way she smiled, the way she asked what time it was every few minutes. Even Margaret noticed. And Margaret had become very careful about hope. Life had punished her too many times for trusting it completely. Yet even she couldn't stop herself from smiling that morning. By afternoon, word had quietly spread through the hospital. John Wayne was coming back. Nobody announced it. Nobody made posters. Nobody organized anything. The nurses simply knew. The doctors knew. The patients knew. And somehow that made the entire building feel lighter. As evening approached, Gracie was wheeled into position outside the common room. The projector stood ready. The screen hung waiting. Patients gathered, some in wheelchairs, some in beds, some carrying oxygen tanks. All of them searching for a temporary escape. Then the elevator doors opened, and he appeared, exactly as promised, hat in hand, walking slowly down the corridor. Not like a celebrity making an entrance. Like a friend arriving for an appointment he had no intention of missing. The smile on Gracie's face appeared before he even reached her, and in that instant, every mile he had driven became worth it. He pulled the folding chair beside her bed. The same tiny chair. The same ridiculous sight. The giant movie star squeezed into furniture clearly designed for someone half his size. The projector started. The room darkened. The beam of light cut through the corridor. The movie began. For a while, neither spoke. They simply watched. A cowboy crossing vast landscapes, mountains, dust, open skies, freedom. The kind of freedom hospital walls could never contain. Halfway through the film, Gracie looked away from the screen. She studied the man beside her. Then she looked back, then at him again. Finally she whispered, "It's the same." Wayne turned slightly. "What's the same?" She pointed first at the screen, then at him. "You." He smiled. She continued, "The movie you, and the real you." Silence followed. Not because he didn't understand, because he did, more than she knew. Hollywood was full of masks, full of people pretending, full of carefully manufactured images. Yet here was a child looking directly through all of it, seeing something real. He answered quietly, "I try to be." Gracie nodded, satisfied, as though that was exactly the answer she expected. Then she returned her attention to the movie. When the credits finally rolled, she was asleep. Her head turned toward the screen,
one hand resting on Captain the Rabbit, breathing softly, peacefully. Wayne remained seated, watching over her. The nurses eventually approached. One of them touched his shoulder gently. "We need to take her back." He nodded, but stayed another minute, then another, as if leaving required more effort than expected. Finally he stood, adjusted his jacket, and watched them wheel her away. He came back the following Thursday, and the Thursday after that, then the next, and the next, again and again, week after week, month after month. Sometimes he drove from Los Angeles, sometimes from remote filming locations, once from Nevada. The distance never mattered. The schedule never mattered. The inconvenience never mattered.
Because somewhere along the way, Gracie Holloway had stopped being a fan. She had become family. The visits developed their own rhythm. They talked about books, about horses, about movies, about school, about the world waiting outside hospital walls. Sometimes Gracie asked questions no adult expected from a child. Questions about courage, questions about fear, questions about why bad things happened. Wayne never lied to her. That was one reason she trusted him. When he didn't know an answer, he said so. When life wasn't fair, he admitted it. And somehow, honesty comforted her more than false reassurance ever could. One afternoon she asked, "Are you scared of anything?" He laughed. "Plenty." Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Of course." "You don't look scared." Wayne leaned back, thinking. Then he pointed toward her. "Neither do you." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Gracie smiled, a small smile, but a proud one. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, something else was happening. Something Gracie never knew. After speaking with Dr. Harmon, Wayne arranged for additional medical consultations. Specialists reviewed her case. Experts examined treatment options. New recommendations arrived. Different approaches were considered. Money changed hands. Important money. Life-changing money. But Wayne never discussed it, never announced it, never took credit. He simply wanted every possible chance given to the little girl in room 14. Margaret eventually learned the truth. People always do. One evening she found him standing alone near a hospital window. The Arizona sunset burned orange across the horizon. She walked beside him. Neither spoke at first. Words felt inadequate. Finally she reached for his hand, squeezed it once. That was all. No speech, no dramatic gratitude, just one silent gesture. Everything that needed saying existed inside it. Winter arrived, then Christmas. For the first time in months, encouraging signs appeared. The doctors noticed changes. Small improvements, tiny victories. But victories nonetheless. Blood work looked better. Energy improved slightly. The treatment seemed to be helping. Nobody celebrated too early. Everyone had learned that lesson. Still, hope returned, this time stronger. Margaret cried privately after one appointment, not because she was sad, because for the first time she allowed herself to imagine a future where Gracie went home, a future where room 14 became a memory, a future where life won. Unfortunately, life does not always follow the stories we want. As winter slowly gave way to spring, the progress stopped, then reversed, quietly, cruelly. The illness began taking ground again.
The doctors tried adjustments, new approaches, new plans, new conversations. But their voices changed. The optimism disappeared. The pauses became longer. The silences heavier. Margaret recognized those silences. She had heard them before. The same silences doctors used before funerals.
The same silences that arrive when hope begins losing a battle. One Monday evening, Dr. Harmon made a phone call. The conversation lasted only minutes, but afterward, nothing remained unsaid. John Wayne listened quietly, asked a few questions, received a few answers, then thanked the doctor. When the call ended, he sat alone for a long time, staring at nothing. The following Thursday morning arrived beneath a pale Arizona sky. Inside room 14, Gracie Holloway took her final breaths. Margaret sat beside her, holding her hand. Captain rested beneath her arm. The photograph of her parents stood on the windowsill. Morning sunlight filled the room, soft, warm, gentle, almost beautiful, as if the world itself had chosen kindness for her final moments. Margaret whispered that she loved her, again and again, the way mothers and grandmothers have done since the beginning of time. Gracie listened, then closed her eyes, and finally, the pain ended. She was 8 years old. Hundreds of miles away, on a film set, John Wayne received the news. His assistant approached carefully, quietly, the way people approach wounded animals, the way people carry unbearable truths. Wayne already knew. Part of him had known for days. Still, hearing it was different. Reality always is. The assistant spoke softly, then stepped away. No dramatic scene followed, no speech, no outburst, no anger, just silence. Wayne walked to an empty folding chair near the edge of the set, sat down, placed both hands on his knees, and stared at the ground. Crew members moved around him, lights shifted, equipment rolled, work continued. Nobody disturbed him. Nobody dared. Because everyone could see it. The grief, the weight, the loss. Minutes passed, perhaps longer. Then a single tear escaped, slowly tracing down his face. He didn't wipe it away, didn't hide it, didn't pretend it wasn't there. For a moment, he simply let it exist. A final tribute, a final goodbye. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and walked back toward the camera. Because sometimes carrying pain is the only option left. After Gracie's death, Margaret received a letter, a real letter. The one he never wrote back in September, the one he should have written, the one he needed to write. It wasn't long, just a few sentences, but every word came from the heart. Margaret kept it forever, alongside the leather notebook, alongside Captain's signed photograph, alongside the colored drawings of horses, and one special drawing, a drawing created by a little girl who spent months studying a hero, a man wearing a cowboy hat, standing tall, drawn carefully, lovingly, exactly as she remembered him. Years passed, then decades. People moved, lives changed, the world transformed. But some things remained. A small wooden box, a handful of memories, a promise kept. Because in a world where famous people often send signatures, John Wayne sent something else. His time, his presence, His Thursdays. And for a little girl who only wanted to forget she was sick for a while, that gift became priceless. She had written those words in her letter. A while is enough. Most people would have forgotten. He didn't. He gave her months. Conversations, laughter, movie nights, hope. He gave her something stronger than medicine. He gave her proof that kindness is real. And sometimes when life becomes unbearably dark, a person doesn't need a miracle. Sometimes they simply need someone to show up. He did. Again, and again, and again, until the very end. And that is why, all these years later, people still remember a little girl in room 14, and the man who kept coming back every Thursday.